Groupie moment.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Kaiju Groupie Podcast. I am your host, Michael, better known as the Kaiju Groupie, and today I have a really fun episode for you guys. I had the pleasure of sitting down with my friend, Nathan Marchand, host of the Monster Island Film Vault podcast. We discussed his love of creative writing and what effect the Kaiju and Toku fandom has had on his career. It was a really fun and candid conversation, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it. But first, I need to do a little bit of housekeeping and read some listener feedback that came by way of an Apple Podcast review. This review comes from username Captain Travis. The title of the review is Great Concept, Great Host, and the review reads like this. I love the concept for this podcast. It's so nice to hear different people with different perspectives sharing their love and fandom. It's a unique idea that I think will help put some positivity into the world. Worth a listen. 5 stars. Well, thank you so much, Travis, for that very kind feedback. It was much appreciated. If you would like to help out the show, you can do so by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And if you do, I promise I'll read your review on a following episode. You can also email your feedback to kaijugroupiepod@gmail.com. So with that said, Nathan and I will see you after the break. And we're back. And with me, I have my good friend, Nathan Marchand. Nathan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing excellent, good sir.
Oh, it's excellent. I feel like we've already recorded an entire episode before we even started recording.
We kind of did. It never fails. You and I, we have to talk for about 30 minutes before we can do anything productive.
Right, it's like a warm-up. It's like a warm-up. I think me and Travis do that.
Oh, well,
me and Travis do that too.
Let me tell you, it's worse on my show. It is so much. I have had nights where I have my guest on my show and we chat for an hour before we start recording. What's insane is sometimes I will have already hit the record button. So there's an hour of fluff before the actual recording.
Oh man, I don't know if I'm going to be brave enough to release the fluff that we talked about before.
I don't. Trust me, I don't.
No, it's fine. I'm kidding. We didn't talk about anything bad, maybe.
Oh, you're talking about our fluff. Okay.
Our fluff. Yeah, our fluff. Oh boy. Okay.
It's only fluff that came from the wool of what, a black sheep? I'm sorry. I mean, admittedly, black sheep wool is not the prettiest.
It is what it is. Some find black sheep wool to be beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.
But man, I am so excited. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Although it's not like we don't talk. We talk throughout the week.
We talk a lot, dude.
But I've been looking forward to putting our conversation on the record for a long time because I feel like there's a lot that you and I can talk about and kind of riff on for say an hour or so. Hopefully we can keep it within an hour. I don't know yet.
That's all I get? Are you sure you can? Okay.
Well, I don't know. I don't know
if talking too much is a mental illness, but if it is, God, I hope they never invent a cure for me. Or maybe it's not a mental illness so much as like mutancy in X-Men.
Maybe. But I really don't want to have to break this episode up into like 10 parts. So we're gonna try to keep this as organized as we possibly can, audio listener, but no promises. So Nathan, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really do appreciate it. And before we get started, I want you to take some time, however much time you need. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you, and tell them about you, the work you do, and just whatever else you want to riff on.
All right. Well, I'm Nathan Marchand. You didn't mention my last name, so I'll throw that in there.
Oh, well,
it's a good, solid French name, but I promise my ancestors were part of the French resistance. We tried to kick out Hitler. At least that's what I like to tell people. I have no idea if I had any family members in the French resistance. But are you still there?
I'm still here. Yeah, okay. We're still rolling.
Yeah, I don't know. You know how podcasts go sometimes, they randomly drop things. But anyway, I am actually going to be telling you guys some things that normally probably would be reserved for my patrons or any of my guests or fellow podcasters or whatnot, which is, I hate to shatter your little worlds, but I don't live and work on Monster Island.
What? No, wait, hang on. You mean
twist?
You don't live on Ogasawara Island? Come on, man.
I do not, unfortunately.
Have you been giving us the old bait and switch all this time?
Maybe. And I'll get to that here in a minute. But like I said, I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I am a born and raised Hoosier boy, and I'm quite proud of that. I'm actually, again, residing in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I am a published author, which I know will be a big thing that we'll be talking about. I went to a private Christian university and studied professional writing, because I had aspirations of becoming a novelist, among other things. And I've been able to do that. I now have, between my traditionally published stuff and my self-published stuff, I think I've got, I want to say 7 books to my name out there in the ether.
Okay.
Along with, I have 2 in that actually I have several, but I have one that's about to be published. It's a sword and sorcery novel, and I will be getting started on I think 3 books that are technically in production for me right now. I'm a very, very busy guy. And along with that, I'm a master's student. I'm studying English with a writing concentration here at a local university. So I've been at that for about 2 years, and my goal is to either December or May to finish everything up. I'm almost done. I just have a few more credit hours left. So that's very exciting. And trying to think what else. Well, and a lot of you may remember me from my previous podcast, the Kaiju Vision Radio, which I did with Brian Scherschel. So if you're ever curious what I think of Godzilla movies, you go and listen to season 1 of that show. But it inspired me, being on that show and then doing some other work elsewhere on my master's degree and all that, really inspired me to start my own podcast. And I'm very glad that I did, because it's allowed me to meet people like yourself. So that's been wonderful.
I appreciate that. I mean, yeah, it's been. You have a lot of irons in the fire, as my dad would say.
Yeah, I do. I've got the podcast, I've got the books, and then that's not even including all the stuff that I do in my spare time. I've mentioned it a little bit on my show, but I do things outside of this realm, like I do gaming, obviously, and I do both tabletop and video games. I do a lot of reading, as you would probably expect.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I like traveling around. I like visiting different places. It's been a little harder to do that because quarantine sucks. But but one that might surprise a lot of people is I'm a ballroom dancer.
I had seen some rumblings on the internet about that, but I wasn't sure if my eyes were deceiving me or not.
Yeah, I've been doing that for 5.5 years now, almost 6.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, how did you get started with that? Like
ballroom dancing?
Like ballroom dancing. Yeah, ballroom dancing. Yeah, let's go into that.
It actually, to put it succinctly, it actually got started with my last girlfriend. She was into swing dancing, and she had been going with her cousin, who was one of my college buddies, to essentially a swing dance group, big one that met in Grand Rapids, Michigan every week. So she had me go there with her, and I caught the bug. And despite the fact that she broke up with me a few months after that, I still had this lingering interest. And then finally, while I was working at my dead-end job that was the only thing I could get during the Great Recession, before I started grad school, I just got fed up with feeling like all I did was go to the dead-end job and I didn't do anything else. So I decided I'm going to take charge of my social life right now, and I'm going to see if I can find some ballroom dance stuff. So I started looking around and found this wonderful studio in Fort Wayne. I tried to go to another one, but I found out it closed. But I found this other studio in Fort Wayne, Indiana called, they're now called the Fort Wayne Ballroom Company. And then I started going there and taking classes and going to their Friday night parties, and it's been great.
Okay.
I've done several, they do showcases, and I've done performances for their showcases. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. Now, that's, taking up dance lessons, taking up dance lessons is something that Lisa and I have always talked about. I just thought that was really fascinating that you are, not only are you a podcaster, an author, and all things in between, but you're also an accomplished ballroom dancer.
Yeah.
That's a deadly combination, my friend.
Yes, it is. Interesting little connection. Here's a little tidbit for you. Did you know that there is a fella who was in a Godzilla movie and a very well-known Japanese film about ballroom dancing?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, now great. Now I'm going to have to Google this because this is what I do. Yes, I found it. The Akira Emoto, who played Akira Yuki in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla.
Okay, fascinating.
Also played a private investigator in Shall We Dance? The Japanese version. It got remade a few years later in America with Jennifer Lopez and trying to remember his name now, because there's a Japanese prime minister that he looks like. Oh
yeah, I think I know this. I know what film you're talking about. I know what film you're talking about, but the name of it escapes me. Because it's
Richard Gere. Richard Gere.
Yeah, there we go. We go.
Yeah. So he's not in the movie a whole lot, but there is a connection. There you go. There's a connection between Toku and ballroom dance.
I love that you know this. I just do. I think it's hilarious that you know this, but in a good way.
Well, let me tell you, I remember hearing some people talk about it, and then I actually watched Shall We Dance, the Japanese version. And I was waiting the whole movie to spot it. I was like, I know I'll recognize him as soon as he's on the screen. And lo and behold, about an hour into the movie, there he is. I'm like, oh, there you are. Waiting this whole time, and now here you are.
Oh, man. Well, okay. So to get this conversation back on the rails a little bit, because this podcast is about topics and people within the fandom surrounding kaiju and tokusatsu, I'll ask you first, how did you find yourself so involved in this particular fandom as opposed to others like Star Wars, Marvel, and some of the other big ones?
Mostly because I don't want Star Wars fans to eat me.
That's okay. That
is
fair.
And here you go. Trigger warning for you all right now. I'm one of the 50% of fans who actually likes The Last Jedi and can give legit reasons why it's good. So, but I don't want to deal with that. So, that's kind of one thing. I am involved with some other fandoms as well. Godzilla and Kaiju is not the only one, although at the moment, because of the podcast, it's probably the one it is the one I'm most involved with right now. So it's really the podcast that did that. I would say, because I'm trying to make inroads promoting the podcast. You and I were talking a little bit beforehand. This is one of our pre-recording chats about one of the things that separates my podcast. Several things really that separate my podcast from everything else. But one of them is that I take an academic approach to these movies, which I've noticed over the last year or so has been becoming more popular. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if maybe Kaiju Vision, my previous podcast, had something to do with that, or maybe it was riding the wave before everyone else did. I don't know, but I've really appreciated that because there's a lot more going on in these movies than I think people realize, especially when you're talking about the cultural barriers that are there, because there are things that we as a modern American audience are not picking up on because we're not the original intended audience for these things. So I try to help break down those barriers. The other thing that separates my show, and this was not necessarily planned, it just kind of happened, because my writing method, and here's a little insight for you. In the writing world, there's generally one of two kinds of writers. You have the outliners and what we call pantsers.
Okay.
Outliners are people who have to outline their entire story before they even start. And they will not stray away from that outline. Then you have pantsers, which is the goofier, I guess, or more endearing term for what are called discovery writers, which is they just start writing. So a famous example of that, of someone who did that, is very successful, would be Stephen King. When Stephen King writes a book, he just starts writing. Even he doesn't know what's going to happen, which explains a lot of things. And I swear I read somewhere that this is how Orson Scott Card, author of such things as Ender's Game, this is how he works, which is that he likes having enough of an outline that he has a general idea of what to do. But if he comes up with something better while he's in those hot throes of creativity, he goes with that. So he gives himself enough leeway. So that's generally how I work. It's like I like having a map. It's like the way I like it is that it's like having a map. I know where I'm starting and where I'm trying to get to, and I could take the direct route to get to it, or if I feel like it, I could take a scenic route. But as long as I'm getting from where I'm starting to where I want to be, that's all that matters. And that's kind of what's happened with this show, because it's a semi-audio drama as well as being a film discussion podcast. It's kind of weird. I remember G-Man, Jack Hutchins, who's been on the show, actually. He was on one of my most recent episodes.
Yeah, it was a good episode.
Was another one of my earliest supporters, and I will never forget, in December, he tweeted out saying that he had started to listen to the show and started listening to it not thinking that this format would work. And then after binging all my episodes, he said, "I stand corrected. Listen to his show." I mean, he gave me this amazing endorsement, and I got a huge influx of followers on Twitter because of it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, G-Man likes my show. Yes.
And that's funny because it seems like G-Man doesn't like anybody.
Yeah, but he likes me. Not to brag, but he likes me. I mean, he already wants to be back on the show. He said that on the air. It's like, I'm chomping at the bit to come back. But so, because what happened was I thought, okay, what's an interesting little gimmick I could give to the show? It's like, okay, how about I say I'm actually on Monster Island, like in Destroy All Monsters. I'm thinking specifically of like what you see in Destroy All Monsters, where they have the big facility there. So I said, how about I say I'm on Monster Island, and they still have the big facility there, and now they have a film curator, and they've hired me as the film curator, and that's why I have access to all these movies, all that sort of stuff. And, I just thought, and then I say, the podcast is also a radio show, and I'm doing all of these things. I've got, a producer on the show and everything. So I was doing all this stuff. And I just thought, okay, it's a nice little setup. It'll give me opportunities to banter with people and make some jokes here and there, some references, whatever, And if you listen to my very first episode, there's some stuff in there that was just meant to be throwaway lines. You know, things like I mentioned, the board of directors on Monster Island and stuff like that. Just meant to be throwaway lines, but my creative writer brain just can't turn itself off.
Right.
And also because I have guests who come on and they say things to kind of play along with the premise, and it kept ballooning to the point where I literally have a storyline going on in the background in the show now. I'm 20 episodes deep. That's excluding my bonus episode, so it's more like 23. But so I'm 20 episodes deep now. And there's a storyline going on in the background. It is crazy, because people will come on the show and they will make up ridiculous ways that they got to Monster Island, as opposed to, I just call them up on Skype or they come to my apartment.
Well, even I have a little bit. I've never been on your show.
That's the thing that you and Travis on Kaiju Weekly were the first people who started playing along with the meta narrative of MIFV outside the show. It threw me for a whirl like you wouldn't believe. I'm just like, now I have to start integrating things from other podcasts. And not even necessarily other podcasts that I'm on. That's the crazy part of this. Because I've kind of adopted this, you should be familiar with this being a pro wrestling fan. The concept of kayfabe, that's kind of how I approach the show. Because the Nathan you hear on the show really is a character in more ways than one. But
for better or for worse.
Yes, but he's a character. He's me cranked to 11. That's really all it is. And in very weird circumstances. Although one of my friends said it's more like you cranked to 22, but
But you're right. It's been a lot of fun. It really has been. I don't even remember what. I think it was mine and Travis's episode about the state of the fandom.
Yeah, it was the state of the fandom. It was because at that point you and I had never talked to each other except occasionally on social media, and you found my show through the Kaiju Apostle, and you just started listening to it because I guess your thing is just listening to random podcasts, and and then you just said, "Hey, you want to come on and." With Travis and I said, okay, sure. And then it's just like, you guys are like my stands now. It's ridiculous.
I should add that to my Twitter bio.
Yeah, you should.
MIFV stand.
Yeah. Stand for Monster Island Film Ball.
Right. Because it was funny because what was the bit that I did? Was it the one where I was on Monster Island and... Well,
it was that because the setup was I flew back to America to be on you guys' show. Uh-huh. And we were having audio issues that day with I think it was Skype or whatever. I think it was Skype. Yeah, we're having audio issues with Skype on your end. So then Travis made up this thing while he was editing the episode and then put this at the beginning that said, we had audio issues because Michael thought we were going to Monster Island and Nathan came to America. So Michael is on Monster Island, and my producer on the show, Jimmy from NASA, has locked him up in a room and won't let him out, and he had to record from there. So it sounds like that's why he sounds like he's in a well. And then it turned into
it's just my poor internet connection.
You got into a flame war with Jimmy, and
I leaned really heavy into it. I'll be honest with you. I leaned heavier into it than probably what was normal at that moment.
Yeah. Like I said, it threw me for a whirl. Like, dude, what?
But the one I'm thinking of, and we'll get to the topic. I'm sorry, audio listener. We'll get to the topic in just a second. We're just reminiscing here, so bear with us. The one I'm thinking of is, I think it was the one when you guys did Night of the Lepus, and I didn't want to be on the episode because I was taking a little bit of a break. And I sent, that's the one when I sent in the audio recording of me on the west side of the island.
Yes.
And then, that one. That one. I was fully committed, sir. I told you behind the scenes what I was willing to do. If it had not been storming that day, I was literally going to go into my backyard, into the tree line, put mud on my face, record myself on my phone, begging for someone to help me because I'm trapped on this island and cannot get
Yes.
out. That's how committed I was to the role.
Yeah. But to kind of get back to talking about kayfabe, kayfabe was a thing. It's still practiced today in professional wrestling, but not nearly to the extent it was back in, before the mid-'90s. It started to unravel in the mid-'90s. But the idea behind kayfabe was that professional wrestlers, once they have made their persona, they never break character. Doesn't matter where they go. If they're out in public, they are always in character. Terry Bollea is always Hulk Hogan when he's in public. Okay? He's only ever Terry Bollea when he goes home. That was the idea.
Right, just like Paul Levesque is always Triple H.
Yeah. Yeah. But, like I said, that kind of unraveled. So the way I approached it is that it's something kind of like that, where unless I state otherwise, when you see anything on the podcast social medias, it's me being in character. It's Nathan Marchand, the character. But and then when I go on other podcasts, I'm kind of shattering the illusion a little bit here. When I go on other podcasts, because you asked me about that the first time you had me on, and he said, "Are you gonna be in character?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna be in character." So the idea I came to is that, okay, if I go on someone else's podcast or anything for that matter, because of my show, I'm going to be in character. It'll be Nathan Marchand, the character. This is an exception to that because this is an interview for me as a member of the fandom and not Nathan Marchand, the character on the show.
Mm.
So like I said, it's one of the exceptions to the rule, and I may make some other ones depending on the reasons for why I appear on other podcasts and all of that. So that's the thinking behind it.
Nathan, like we mentioned, you have been such a great host of the Monster Island Film Vault, but you're also a published writer and author, and that's sort of the meat of the conversation I want to get into for this particular episode. The first couple of questions I want to get into are, what got you into writing, and was it always like something you were passionate about?
There's a little bit of a story behind this. I think ever since I was a kid, I've always had a bit of a knack for storytelling, as a lot of kids do. It's just a very human thing. Humans love to tell stories. But I didn't start thinking about it in a more formal context until I was in 6th grade. Just to let all of you know, I was actually homeschooled starting in 1st grade. Okay. And so I was in 6th grade English, and for a couple of days, one week, all of my lessons were about fanciful stories. That's how the textbook termed them, fanciful stories. And then at the end of those 3 days, my assignment in the textbook was to write a fanciful story. So I decided, okay, this could be a little bit of fun. And then I more or less wrote, call it an insane fan fiction disguised as a Toy Story knockoff, where I wrote the story where all of my action figures and things came to life and fought each other.
Okay.
And I enjoyed that so much that I actually started writing sequels to it. And it turned into this kind of series where if I would get more action figures, I would add them to the cast of characters and things like just kept it going. Then I started discovering things like fan fiction on the internet. I even wrote my fair share of fan fiction. Interestingly, a lot of the fan fiction I actually finished was Godzilla fan fiction. Mm-hmm. This was around this time that I discovered Godzilla.
Okay.
So that's the origin of it. And then as I got later in my high school career, I said, you know what? I enjoy doing this. I actually want to do this as a job. I want this to be my career. So I started looking into universities that offered something like that. And I actually came across one that in the local area that offered a professional writing program, which at the time was very unique. So, and couple that with the fact that it was a Christian university, because I probably should have mentioned this a little bit sooner, like yourself, Michael. I am also a professing Christian.
Right.
And
right.
So the fact that it was a Christian university was a great bonus. So I was very excited to go there. And I spent 4 years there learning how to write. At that point, right before I started college, I had started writing what would become my first novel. I dropped it for a while because of school, but I picked it back up for a class while I was in school. And then about a year or so after I graduated, I finished my first draft and then began the process of submitting it and the whole publication thing, which is an entire story unto itself. Because the writing industry is the slowest industry in the universe.
And so I've heard. I hear it's actually easier to get a movie completed than it is a book published.
Yeah, it feels like that at points. Although I did take a screenwriting class while I was in university. So that was the thing that was nice about the program, is that it offered you opportunities to take classes on a wide variety of forms of writing. So I am very well versed and very well trained. I can do a lot of things. Now, I tended toward things like fiction writing or feature writing. If you're talking about, like, if I worked at a newspaper, I'd say I want to be a feature writer. I love finding interesting stories and interviewing interesting people and writing about them and things like that. I worked as a beat reporter. It was one of my first post-college jobs, and it just wasn't a very good fit. But whenever I got to write the feature stories for this newspaper, I was just reveling in it. I loved it. Finding interesting people in the local area to talk to, or interesting stories about things that are going on in the community. That's where my passion was at the time.
I mean, that's super fascinating. I've always been personally interested in writing, but I've just never had, I've never had sort of the discipline to sit down and just start.
It's wonderful, but it's hard. I will tell you. Don't let any writer lie to you and say, "Oh, it's always fun." No, it's not.
It just came to me in a dream. It just came to me.
I can't. I have this, and I'm not the only writer who has said this. I have this weird image in my head of, I'm sitting down and I'm trying to write something, and then I type out a sentence or whatever, and the characters are all standing behind me, looking over my shoulder at my screen, and I'll write something and say, "I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't say that. You need to change that." "No, I don't want to." "You change that now."
So are we getting a glimpse into your own self-editing process?
Yes. And the same is true on the podcast, let me tell you. I write the little story bits that go in there, and oh man.
I think that I think your background in writing really has done nothing but help your show, because we'll touch on this just really briefly, but I think your format for the Monster Island Film Ball is probably one of the most unique formats that are out there. And you're able to differentiate yourself from the other kaiju podcasts that just simply review films. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that
No, I mean, I listen to you and Travis on Kaiju Weekly every week. I love what you guys do.
Well, thank you.
I really do.
Thank you.
I will tell you, there's a lot of things that go into a good podcast, and hosts that have a great rapport that will cover up a multitude of sins.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Me and Travis have become really good friends, and I hope that shows on our episodes.
Oh, it does. Yeah. It really does.
But something you mentioned just now about screenwriters, and I know that typically when we're having these conversations within the fandom, we're talking about films, and specifically Godzilla films, Gamera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll ask you, are there any screenwriters or just writers in general? It can be from comics, books, just anything in general that has influenced you along the way.
There's a lot I could go into with this. I'll try to keep it brief and relatively relevant. That sounded really stupid. Anyway, can you tell I am a writer? I'm editing myself as I talk.
It's fine. It's fine.
But I would be remiss if I didn't bring up people like my favorite. Two of my favorite authors are Tolkien and Lewis. So they've had a tremendous impact not only on me as a creator, but on me as a person. You know, they've influenced my writing and my thinking. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge one. Lord of the Rings is my all-time favorite novel. And I've also been influenced by people like Robert Heinlein and I mentioned Orson Scott Card. So Orson Scott Card's another one. Mm-hmm. In terms of screenwriting, well, and also I should bring this up. Another person who's had a huge impact on me and who is sadly no longer with us is Stan Lee. That was something that didn't dawn on me actually until right after he died. I realized that I had consumed much of his material and what he did as a writer had become a huge part of my life. Like Travis, your friend Travis, I am a huge fan of comic books. And so what Stan did for comic books has been a huge part of my life. Mm-hmm. And I was very glad that I got to meet him when I did, because it was only about a year and a half after I met him. Yeah. And he was finishing up his tour, on conventions. He stopped not long after I met him, but I was very glad that I did. And for me, Stan is an inspiration in not just for what he did, the characters he created and the stories he told, but because Stan actually didn't become successful until a lot later in his life. He was almost 40. A lot of people don't know this. His career really took off with the publication of Fantastic Four #1, and he was almost 40 years old when that happened. And it almost didn't happen. He had to really fight to get that story made, to get that book made. And so I admire his tenacity and the fact that, he spent 20 years just working hard at Marvel Comics until he finally got his big break. So all of these people who seem to think that you have to achieve uber success when you're 25 or whatever, they're crazy. Some of the most amazing people who have ever done anything came to it later in life. So that's another thing that's inspirational for me.
I think I think it comes down, it's a maturity level. When you reach a certain age, you reach a certain, you reach a certain maturity level where you have lived a good life so far, and that has influenced you in more ways than you can probably imagine. And I just think that at that time, if he got his start really at 40, then by that time, he had gained a lot of wisdom. And I think that comes with his age and maturity. And really, honestly, there are very few people that I would consider to be national treasures. And I really believe that Stan Lee was one of those national treasures.
Yeah, I would agree. And then a couple of other people, you may not necessarily know their names, but they are two of the minds behind my all-time favorite movie, which might disappoint your listeners because it's not Tokusatsu. Uh-oh. But it's Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, because another one of my favorite fandoms is Star Trek. In fact, I was a fan of Star Trek well before I had even discovered Godzilla and Tokusatsu.
Well, I'm going to be honest. I consider myself more of a Trekker than, say, a Star Wars enthusiast. I just never could catch on with the whole with Star Wars. I don't know what they're good movies. Don't get me wrong, and the lore is a lot of fun. It's just there's something about it that did not necessarily grab me.
Well, that's fair, but for me, the worst part of Star Wars is the fans. But no, those would be because this movie is so ingrained in my head. It has influenced a lot of my writing. I will tell you that every time I look back on all of my books and I can see little pieces of this of Star Trek II showing up in all of them, because that's just how seminal it was. If it was a Star Trek II, it was something from Star Trek. But the screenwriters behind that, there's several people who were associated with the script for that movie. But one was a guy named Jack B. Swords. I hope I'm saying that right. And then also the director, who apparently also worked on the script but was uncredited for such, named Nicholas Meyer. So I owe a lot to them as well. And I would be very, very remiss if I did not talk about Shinichi Sekizawa and Takeshi Kimura, because those were Toho's go-to screenwriters during the Showa era. And let me tell you, when I discovered Godzilla as a teenager, I just started eating everything up from that. And so what they did, their work, I didn't even know who they were at the time. I learned all this stuff like 4 years ago, I think, in doing research on all of this stuff. And I realized, oh my gosh, most of these movies were written just by two guys. That's insane. And then I started digging into who they were. They were very different men. And I mean, might as well put a link to my panel presentation at G-Fest last year about those two guys, with Danny DeManna from the Godzilla Novelization Project. Just so much. But the work that they did, again, became a huge part of my upbringing and my fandom without me knowing. I didn't know who they were at the time. So I have to bring them up as well. And to be honest, I really do think that we were talking about how there's this meta narrative going on in I almost said the Marvel Island Film Vault. What the heck is wrong with me? The Monster Island Film Vault. I really do think it's very much in the spirit of Sekizawa. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm anywhere close to the writer that Sekizawa was.
Right.
I don't think anyone can be. But there's definitely a Sekizawa spirit within that. The humor and the kind of outlandish stories that are going on in it. Sekizawa was not afraid to be crazy.
No, he was not. That. Yeah, I mean it's interesting, and I'm gonna go ahead and call an audible right now. I know this is not in the notes, but we were just sitting here talking about just sort of your influences, and it made me think of something I wanted to ask you, and that's if you could rewrite. So let's bring it back to the kaiju fandom. If you could rewrite any kaiju film and make it in your image, which film would it be?
I don't know. I don't want to pick any of the good ones because that might be borderline heresy.
That's why we call it an audible. I happened to think about it, and I just wanted to see what your answer would be.
Yeah. And Danny, that's a lot of what Danny's doing with the GNP, except it's more like expanding on it and filling in things because it's the Godzilla Novelization Project, so he's filling in plot holes that are in the films with his novelizations because he refuses to write shallow characters. Well, have fun with Megalon.
or Jet Jaguar for that matter.
Well, the funny thing is Jet Jaguar is on my show now, so he occasionally shows up. But you know what? Thinking about it for a second here, I think I would have to go with Godzilla versus King Ghidorah.
From 91? From
1991.
Okay.
Although it's less about rewriting it in my image and more like script doctoring the snot out of it. Because that movie's script is busted. It is all kinds of busted.
I mean, it's a mess. I'm a fan of the movie. I'm a fan of the movie. I'll admit it. It's one of my favorite Heisei films, but it is a mess. And I know Eric and Alex love that movie. They talk about it a lot.
Oh, they love it because it's a mess.
Yeah. I think that's the whole reason why. I get it.
I mean, you're talking to someone who refers to Godzilla vs. Megalon as a glorious train wreck, and I love every second of that movie, but I also acknowledge this is a terrible movie. But Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, it's harder for me to give it the pass that I give Megalon because it takes itself so seriously.
Very. Oh, they play it so
It
straight
takes
down
itself
the middle.
so Megalon at least knows that it's a cheese fest. Ghidorah takes itself very seriously. And there are things in this movie that I really like Shindo. Yoshio Tsuchiya, brilliant. If I was script doctoring this thing, I was like, Shindo stays. Shindo's the best part of this movie. Shindo stays. Things like that. But I would want to go through, kind of comb through it. I would probably cut, at least a couple of characters out. I would make Miki Sagusa more involved. I would actually define her powers and get her to actually use them,
right.
And not just stand around doing things. I would try to break down the time travel and figure out how to make it work. The whole thing about it being this weird time loop, which is what Toho has been trying to put out to say, oh, that's why this movie makes sense. So like, okay, but it should have been in the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. There might be a problem when the time travel and Rebirth of Mothra 3 makes a bit more sense. I'm just saying.
Oh boy. You talk about a glorious train wreck.
Actually, I just put out an episode. By the time this comes out, I will just put out an episode on Rebirth of Mothra 3, and I found myself liking it a heck of a lot more than I thought I would. It's been like 15 years since I had seen it, but I would actually say it was legitimately good. Not great, but it managed to eke its way into legitimately good. Beside the point. So I would just want to make sense out of that whole thing. But things like the politics that are in it, which I know even now people try to drum up controversy around it with its politics. I'm actually not bothered by it, and I would probably leave those in there because it's an interesting theme to explore. And
it is.
It's very much a snapshot. For all of the movie's flaws, that part of it is a very interesting snapshot of Japan at that moment. They were coming out of this long era of prosperity. They really thought that they were unstoppable. That they would just keep going. And then right before the movie went into production, they had the asset bubble burst. And it was just this massive recession that just came right on them fast and sudden. And they've never fully recovered from that since.
Right.
So, like I said, it's a fascinating idea. And and also at the time, because the country was growing so fast economically, there were people in the United States who were honestly afraid of them because they thought that Japan was just going to buy everything. So there was some animosity there, which is definitely reflected in the fact that we have our villains who are both Westerners in that movie. So I would probably leave that alone. But my gosh, would I be just trying to fix everything? And it would. So I'd probably end up like one of those crazy conspiracy theorists with a cork board and lots of thumbtacks and yarn.
So you would probably be, you would probably be one of those that would say that Godzilla versus King Ghidorah is a very anti-American movie. Because I've heard that. I've heard that.
No, I don't think it's meant to be anti-American. The director said he loves America. So, and he also wrote the screenplay. I don't think it's anti-American, but I think it's playing around with a lot of stuff that was being talked about a lot at that time.
Yeah.
So, because there's some weirdness going on both sides. I mean, Shindo is a businessman and has built his own private nuclear submarine. That violates all kinds of laws in Japan, but he kept it outside Japanese waters. That was his loophole, So it plays around with a lot of really interesting stuff, but I don't think it's anti-American. Not at all.
No, it does play around. Excuse me. It does play around with some really interesting themes. But I wanted to bring it up because that's one of the critiques of the film that I hear a lot, along with Shin Godzilla, of course. Shin,
don't get me started on Shin.
Is a very
I love Shin, and it's not I shouldn't say. It's not what a lot of people think it is.
Right. I totally agree. And I think you and I have talked about it, that neither one of us believe it is a nationalistic movie. It's more of a political satire than anything else.
It's a political satire, and it's also very patriotic.
Yeah, it is.
But that's a whole other podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that is literally a whole other podcast.
I mean, I did a 3-hour podcast on that movie. Well, I was one half of a 3-hour podcast on that movie. So yes, I'm very well versed.
Right. Yeah, I do like Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. Like I said, it's one of my favorite Heisei films, but it has its issues. I mean, I'm not going to, I'm not going to say there is not. I don't think there's a Godzilla movie out there that doesn't have some kind of issue within itself, like either a plot hole issue, a character issue, even King of the Monsters, which I believe is a fantastic movie. And
I do as well. And there are times I feel like, do I have to just appoint myself the fandom's King of the Monsters apologist? Because I feel like that's what I have to be now.
Well, not necessarily, because you have the King of the Monsters camp, and then you have the Shin camp, and then you have the anime camp. Although the anime camp, I feel like, is a lot smaller than what it appears. So it's mainly just
I'm something of an apologist for those too.
Yeah. So it's mainly just Legendary's version of Godzilla, or Shin Godzilla is really the big two that people like to fight over.
But I do want to make something clear. This is a thing that's been coming up a lot in the fandom the last it's been coming up a lot in the last 6 months, I guess.
Sure.
That's where to put it. Although it was being talked about before that. And that's gatekeeping. I have no desire to be a gatekeeper in this fandom. Zero. I'm not going to tell somebody you have to agree with me that Godzilla versus King Ghidorah has a busted script, and that it's not anti-American. Someone could, disagree with me and say, no, I think the script is great and it is anti-American. Okay, let's talk about it.
Sure.
I'm not going to tell them they're not a real fan. I'm not going to try to cancel them and get them kicked out. I have no interest in that. None whatsoever. I make this podcast because it's fun. And I'm an academic at heart, and I want to share these things. I've been noticing over the last few years, there has been this increase in people who are interested in approaching Kaiju and Tokusatsu from an academic, intellectual standpoint. And I think that's wonderful. And I want to keep riding that wave because I think that needs to be put out there more. I've gotten really tired of people saying, I like these movies because they're bad. Like, no, most of them are not. Please stop making us all look like idiots.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nathan. I have no desire to be a gatekeeper. I mean, are there aspects of the fandom that I dislike or disagree with? Yeah. I mean, that's just part of it. That's just part of it.
I won't bring up Godzilla Mothra shippers. I promise.
Please don't. Because if I haven't made that clear enough, I just don't really. Let's just don't. But yeah, I like I said, I don't have the desire to be a gatekeeper either. The whole reason behind this show is to show that I'm not a gatekeeper, honestly, because I want to have one-on-one conversations with people I agree with and then people I don't necessarily agree with, because I feel like we're better if we sit down and have those conversations than just adding each other, as in like at symbol on Twitter at each other and yelling and screaming at each other over nonsense. That's not helpful, I don't think. And it's not helpful to try to tell someone how they should watch a movie or how they should view a movie. I just don't think that's very productive. It's more productive to sit down, have a one-on-one conversation similar to what we're doing here, and find out why you don't like something or why you love something.
I mean, like I know you and I disagree pretty strongly about the anime trilogy. I like it. I like it a lot. And if I remember correctly, you are not a fan.
I am not a fan. I think you say Megalon is a glorious train wreck. I really honestly think the anime trilogy is a train wreck in itself.
Yeah. So I'm sure you and I could, I mean, if we ever wanted to, we could have a nice back and forth.
Oh, I'm sure.
on the anime trilogy. And I would welcome that, so long as it's I can't believe I have to say this. Let's keep it civil. Like, come on, we're not talking about political issues here that, determine who somebody votes for in November. We're talking about movies, but it's been so conflated.
Yeah.
People take a criticism of a movie of a movie they like as an attack upon themselves, and that's a whole other issue unto itself. But but my point is, let's have a conversation. That's what I would say. Let's have a conversation.
Mm.
Why don't you like the anime trilogy? Well, why do you like the anime trilogy? Here's why, and just have a productive conversation about it. My gosh, who knows? We might actually change each other's minds a little.
Maybe. I mean, my goal, and I'm yet to do it, and it's something that I'm going to do eventually when I have an extra bit of, when I have an all day of nothing else to do, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch all three in order at one time. Because as you have said before, even I think on even your show or even our show or on our show or something, I've heard you say it. If you take them as a whole, it's better than taking them individually.
Yeah, they don't work as standalone movies, which is their strength and their weakness.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily like them, is because I've seen them all individually, but I've seen them all individually very spread out from each other. So I need to sit down and watch them in succession, one after another, to get the full story. And it may change my mind. I am very open to having my mind changed.
Yeah. I think of it like this. I did an episode on the anime trilogy. It's episode 3.
Mm-hmm.
If you want show notes,
I remember
there you go. Fill that in too. And for that episode, I blocked out an entire evening and I binged all 3 on Netflix, one right after the other, to see if that actually changed my viewing experience. Now, keep in mind, I liked them before I went into this, but when I experienced that whole saga over the course of about 4.5 hours, all running it together, it was a different experience. It felt complete. It was essentially a 4.5 hour movie that got released in chunks.
Mm-hmm.
And because none of those first 2 chunks were not particularly satisfying because they were not self-contained stories.
Right.
I think that's where a lot of the ire came from for a lot of fans. And then when they did get the conclusion, it wasn't really what they wanted. So that just amplified things. But when you, like I said, it's a different experience when you watch all of them together.
Yeah, I guarantee it is. I guarantee it is, because like I said, I've only seen them individually and very spread out from each other. Like I watched Planet of the Monsters 1 month, wait a month, watch the second one, wait a month, watch the third one. It's just because I didn't have time to sit down and watch them all. But I think I even watched the first 2 as they came out, and then watched the third one much, much later, and without actually refreshing my memory on the first 2. So again, I'm going to have to sit down and just watch them all together and see if that changes my mind. I'm a little bit, I'll be honest with you, and this is going to make me sound like a gatekeeper there for just a hot second. I'm a little bit more forgiving of, say, the Ultraman anime on Netflix than I am the Godzilla anime. And I've not necessarily figured out why yet. And the only summation that I can come up with is that maybe since I'm still on what I call my Ultra journey, because I'm just now,
I am as well.
I'm just now discovering Ultraman. I'm just now getting accustomed to the lore and everything associated with it, that I'm willing to go in with eyes unclouded, as Rob so eloquently put it during the last quarantine.
Boy, were our eyes unclouded by the end of that weekend.
But I'm willing to go into that, or I was willing to go into that, because I binged it all in one evening. I was willing to go into that with sort of an open mind, whereas, the Godzilla anime trilogy, I was excited to watch it, and then I was disappointed, and then I was further disappointed because I feel like we got the old bait and switch with City on the Edge Battle. And
okay, that I will give people a concession for that, because that was mismarketed.
Mm-hmm.
That was on Toho. They mismarketed it.
And then, you know, although some like part 3, like some of the religious aspects of it were fascinating, there was just something about that particular part that just didn't grab me. And I don't know if it was just the Space Noodle, King Ghidorah, or what it was. There was just something that was very unsettling to me about the third part. And I've not been able to figure out why. So long story short, I'm going to have to just sit down and watch it again just to see if my opinion is going to change about it. So, you know, before we wrap this up, Nathan, and since I want to kind of stay on the topic of you being an author and so much else, but mainly this conversation is about you being an author and just a screenwriter in your own right, or just a writer in general. Let's just say that a creative writer in general.
I've written screenplays, just so you know. I have written screenplays. So
yeah, I know that. I think you told me that one of the last private conversations we had, I think you let me know that. It was actually, I think it was right before I invited you to come on this show and told you what the topic was. But normally I would ask you, what are you binging? So I'm going to kind of niche down just a little bit and say, what are you reading right now? And are there any sort of good book, comics, magazine, whatever recommendations you want to make to the listeners?
It's at a point like this where I feel like I need that gif of Thanos saying, everything. Because I'm looking over at my bedstand now and I just see a pair of towers of books waiting to be read. And don't even get me started about the gobs of comics that I have that need to be read, and you don't want to see my Netflix queue or any of my streaming service queues because they go on for miles.
Right.
But the books I am reading currently are maybe she's related to you. I don't know, but one is Mythology by Edith Hamilton.
No relation.
Okay, that's unfortunate. But no, and that's a collection of Greek myths, though it kind of distilled down to their essentials. Okay. So this has been very fun because I'm reading it right now because I'm planning to work on a novel, I should say, that will deal with Greek mythology characters.
As a Harryhausen fan, I probably would love that.
Well, it won't be quite that huge an epic, I won't.
Well, I'm just saying.
I'm also, and I should have finished this a long time ago, but I keep going through it a little too slower. I get interrupted by things like grad school.
Just little stuff like grad school.
Yeah, little things like grad school. But I have Action Comics 80 Years of Superman.
Oh, okay.
Which was this massive graphic novel that got put out 2 years ago now. For the 80th anniversary of Superman. And it's a collection of about, I don't know how many issues, but spanning the entire history of the character and Action Comics. All these wonderful reprints. So I'm delving into a lot of its classic stuff that I didn't know about. There's even a story in here that was written and drawn by the original creators of Superman, Simon and Schuster, and that was thought lost for years, and then somebody found it. And so it got printed for the first time in this book. So, because as I mentioned, I'm a comics fan as well, and Superman's one of my favorite characters.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, judging from your Facebook profile picture.
Well, that was one of them. Me in my Superman costume doing one of my dance performances. Yes.
So it was just this big amalgamation of all things Marchand right there. It was the full Marchand.
I was waiting for that. I will tell you, I was confessing, I was hoping for an opportunity at the beginning when you introduced me about how, yes, I'm now going to do the full Marchand on myself, and that sounds an awful lot of context. Anyway, moving on.
I tell you what, the title of this episode is going to be The Full Marchand.
I was also going to suggest that should be the title of the piece. But no, and then one more book I'll mention.
Sure.
I need to actually pick it back up. I was reading it a lot for school, but I actually do want to go through and finish the whole thing. I took a poetry writing class last semester, and I have a book here called Making Certain It Goes On. It's a collection of poems by a guy named Richard Hugo. So, who was actually one of my favorite poets from that class and from a previous poetry class I had taken. So, I'm a diverse man. And in terms of what am I binging right now in the traditional sense, currently there's a lot that I could mention. I'll just mention a few.
Sure.
Like you, I'm on my Ultra journey.
Okay.
And I am currently on Ultraman Ace. I'm a few episodes into Ultraman Ace.
What episode are you on? Just out of curiosity.
Today I just watched episode 3, so I'm not very far into it.
Oh,
but my gosh, I am so happy they changed the uniforms.
You have so much to look forward to, my friend.
I know. I'm just saying. I get that, but I'm just like, my gosh, am I glad they changed the uniforms, because I hated the uniforms for the science team in that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For those first 2 episodes, they looked awful. These bleached out pinkish oranges.
Yeah.
And the really light grays. I'm like, you look terrible. Oh, the uniforms in the previous ones were so much better. And then in this episode, they made them the burnt orange. And they darkened the grays. I'm like, okay, thank God you are not eyesores anymore. I don't know if I could survive 52 episodes of looking at your terrible uniforms.
That's a long one. I'm about halfway through it. So yeah, it's a long series.
So there's that. And the thing, I probably would have finished it sooner, but my roommate here at the apartment is my brother Jared, my younger brother Jared.
Sure.
And it was funny. Right before quarantine, I got Ultra 7. So I decided, I'm going to start watching Ultra 7. And my brother, Jared, saw that I had Ultra 7. He's like, oh, you have this? Like, yeah. He's like, oh, I want to watch it with you. Okay. And he had watched the original Ultraman with me already from a few years ago when I bought the first DVD set. So he said he wanted to watch Ultra 7 with me, which just surprised me a little bit. And then it became our thing. We just kept watching Ultra shows together.
I finished Ultra 7, although I know you're a fan of Ultra 7. It grew on me eventually, like toward the end of the series. But
the problem that Ultra 7 has is that its highs are really high and its lows are,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and because of that, its lows look lower by comparison. The valleys look deeper because its mountains are really tall.
Yeah, I think that's something that you and I have talked about privately. It's just you have your favorite episodes that are written by very specific screenwriters, and those are the really high ones, and then the rest just kind of pales in comparison.
Yeah. But so there's that, and on Netflix, I'm going through Monty Python's Flying Circus. That's been a little bit of a slow process. Yeah, that's been a little bit of a slow process, but I think I have about 12 episodes left to go.
Okay.
I think on that one. And as someone who's been a huge fan of Monty Python and the Holy Grail and things like that, watching the TV show where they all got their start, it's been very fun. And I love how unabashedly and politically incorrect they are. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, no one would even think of doing this now.
Do you think any of those movies could be remade today, shot for shot?
Oh heck no. Maybe Holy Grail. I think they might be able to do Holy Grail.
Yeah, but
the TV show, no, there are sketches in the TV show no one would ever touch.
Yeah, you would still have to rewrite Holy Grail a little bit to be a little bit more politically correct, and at least in this climate, anyway.
Yeah, and don't get me started on Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks's movies. Oh my gosh. No one would make Blazing Saddles now.
Oh, no, sir. They would not. And I really like Blazing Saddles. In fact, I don't even think that you could even remake Airplane or Airplane 2 at this point either.
Yeah, probably not. And then along with that, that's not necessarily binging in the traditional sense.
Right.
But the current shows that I am keeping up with now, or catching up with, I should say, would be the final season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Ultraman Z. I don't care what they say on the show. I'm a dirty, dirty American. It's Ultraman Z. The rest of the world calls that letter Z, but here in America, we call it Z.
I thought it was Z, not like, I thought it was Z.
It's Z or Z, that's the name of the letter. Like the Brits call it Z or Z. I think on this Ultraman show they say Z, which is a little
they go they say Zeto or something. The way it's said is a little bit it's a little weird.
But it's actually supposed to be it's just a letter. It's just Ultraman Z. But so he's Ultraman Z to me. I don't care what anyone says. I even put a poll up on Twitter. It's like, how do you actually say his name?
What have you thought? Just really quickly, what have you thought about the show so far?
The first episode was a little rough, and by that I mean it was just nothing but action.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I need to latch onto these characters. I felt the same way about Ultraman Ace as well. It's just nonstop action. I'm just like, oh my gosh, can I have anything with the characters? I need characters to latch onto, but I keep forgetting it's how a lot of these Japanese TV shows, whether they're live action or anime, it's just kind of how they work. The first episode throws you into the middle of everything. So you kind of have to, they show you the world by putting you into the middle of chaos. Mm. And then in the next episode, they explain things like the characters and such to you, which made me glad because the next episodes actually started fleshing things out a bit more and it made more sense. I still don't understand how there is a human woman who is in love with Ultraman just because he's 4,000 years old or whatever. That's a little weird. But but other than that, this is the current Ultra show, and I haven't seen a lot of the newer Ultra shows, and I know a lot of them have been, as one person put it, toyetic. And this one's a little bit toyetic as well. The props at points look like toys, like the toys you could actually go buy, and I'm like, really, guys, we're doing this? Okay, but I will admit,
it's effective.
Yeah, it is, and I will say the show has managed to suck me in enough that it doesn't register with me nearly as much that they're using literal toys as props. Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm not used to commercials and ads. I'll be honest. We cut our cable off, 2 years ago. And to sit down and I'm used to YouTube ads. That's not what I'm talking about here. But to see random product placement in the middle of these episodes is a little bit jarring, but I understand, Bandai and those companies they're all about getting the kids excited about the gear that's in this show. And like you said, they're obviously using what appears to be the actual toy as their prop, which sort of makes sense. It's good marketing.
Yeah, and I will admit the show's made enough of an impression on me that I actually thought, again, funny thing I thought about doing when you introduced me, I actually thought about starting off by saying, I ask you to chant my name! Because that's one of Ultraman Z's catchphrases at this point.
Yeah, for sure. So before we get out of here, Nathan, I'm going to ask you, do you have anything you want to plug? So I want to give you the opportunity to plug whatever and whoever or what, just whatever you want to plug in this moment. Go ahead and go for it, man.
My friend, you don't have enough time.
Okay.
Since we're talking about the author stuff, my author website is nathanjsmarchand.com. You can find, I blog there. Not as much as I used to, but I blog there, and you can find links to where you can buy my books and all kinds of things. And I put up updates there about appearances I'm making, where I'm going to be, book signings, all that sort of stuff. And yes, JS is my two middle initials. I have two middle names, and I had to use that because the domain nathanmarchand.com was already taken. I'm going to find that. We're going to have a talk. I'm going to knock on his door and say, I want your domain. Anyway. And then you can follow me on Twitter. My author Twitter is at Nathan Marchand, and you can search out my professional Facebook page for my author stuff, which is The Worlds of Nathan Marchand. So there's all that. For the podcast, it's the Monster Island Film Vault. You can the website for that is monsterislandfilmvault.com. And then the podcast is on multiple social medias. On Twitter, we're at the Monster Isla 1, or you could also follow my intrepid producer at NASA Jimmy. And then we're on Facebook at Monster Island Film Vault. Instagram, we're Monster Island Film Vault. And then I would much appreciate any support your listeners could give me on Patreon. I just launched the Patreon for the podcast about a month and a half ago, somewhere in that vicinity. We have a few patrons right now. I'd love to have more. You can find us by searching Monster Island Film Vault, I would guess.
Okay. Oh, and you're also going to be on a panel coming up, correct?
Yes. Since G-Fest was canceled this year, I was scheduled to have a couple of panels, one of which was going to be with Danny DeManna, the creator of the Godzilla Novelization Project. But we are going to do that panel now this weekend as part of Kaiju Con Line. So it's I found out that there's actually several online cons being put on to fill in the gap left by G-Fest. Mm-hmm. And this is one of them, that Kyle Yount, the granddaddy of all kaiju podcasters.
I like to call him the Godfather.
Yes, the Godfather. He's going to make us an offer we can't refuse, which was due to be on Kaiju Con Line. But so Danny and I will be doing a presentation on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern, I want to say. It's 1 p.m. Central, if I remember correctly. Check the website for Kaiju Con Line to get the schedule for it, just in case. Yeah. I might be wrong. So there's that. And we are going to be talking, our panel is going to be on, we're calling it the original MCU Connecting Showa Continuity. So we're going to be going through a bunch of Toho's Showa era Kaiju and Tokusatsu films and determining if all of them are actually in canon with each other, and if they are, how we can make sense of it. There are a few movies, I will tell you, that we left out because they just genuinely don't work. But for the ones that we are including, we're going to go do deep dives to connect all the threads.
Well, I'm not going to ask you here what those films are because I don't want to give it away. So,
what, the ones that were left out?
No, the ones that you've included.
Oh, there's too many to mention.
Yeah, so. I'm not gonna go into that here. I want audio listener, please go check it out. I'm sure it's gonna be a fantastic panel. It's just a shame that G-Fest was canceled, but all these great podcasts and other creatives within the fandom are just doing what they can to put on what I think is going to be just a fantastic replacement. I hope, and it sounds like if everything goes well, it may be a yearly thing. So that's something to look forward to.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. So, man, I just want to thank you again for coming on the show, helping out a brand new podcast by just having this conversation, which I hope the audio listeners enjoy.
I'm not even a year-old, man, so I'm still kind of brand spanking new, too. So
yeah, well, we all try to help each other. We all try to help each other out. And honestly, this conversation was not any different than what we would have in private. So that just makes it actually even better. So before I get out of here, I just want to say thank you again, Nathan. And I guess I will see you guys next time.
Sayonara.
Thank you for listening to the Kaiju Groupie Podcast, a podcast produced and hosted by Michael Hamilton using redcircle.com. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more, please email me directly at kaijugroupiepod@gmail.com. Also, follow us on social media by joining the Kaiju Groupie Facebook group, on Twitter at Kaiju Groupie 54, and on Instagram at The Kaiju Groupie. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find your favorite giant monster podcasts. Also, please take a moment to rate and review the show. This will help spread the word to other Kaiju and Tokusatsu fans, and if you do, I promise I will read your comments on the next episode. All film, audio clips, and graphics belong to their respective copyright holders, with no infringement being intended or implied. So until next time, I'm Michael, the Kaiju Groupie, signing off.